الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا ما يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار على سبيله إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll continue in our lesson of the science of ilm al-mustalah, and we're covering the book that is known as At-Timithi fi ulum al-hadith by Ibn Malakin rahimahullah. And we had ended the last discussion discussing matters relating to aqsam al-hadith. So the author rahimahullah, he first mentioned concerning aqsam al-hadith, and that he divided aqsam al-hadith, the categories of hadith, into three main categories that are mentioned as sahih, Hasan and Da'if. Then we discuss each of those three categories separately as mentioned by the author. So inshallah ta'ala today we'll continue from where we have left off regarding what the author rahimahullah start discussing that he referred to as Anwa Ulum al-Hadith, concerning different types of hadith. So the different types of hadith. Now we'll start discussing specific types of hadith that are covered in Ilm al-Hadith by way of one, knowing concerning certain mustalahat, certain terminologies as to what is meant by them by the ulama of hadith, and also discuss concerning the hukum that is attached to it, and at times trying to give maybe a sum of example and also sources that one may find this particular type of hadith that can be found. So as the author rahimahullah, Ibn Malakin rahimahullah, he mentioned by stating anwa'uhu zahidatun ala 80. So he mentioned that as for these different types, anwa al-hadith, that they exceed over 80 different types. So 80 different types of anwa hadith, and he'll try to mention these different types of hadith or mustalahat of hadith. The first of those he mentioned al-Musnad. So the first is al-Musnad, and he defined Musnad as huwa ma itasal sanaduhu ila Nabi alayhi salam. So this is what he defined as Musnad. So this particular noun of Musnad, that in the original book of Al-Muqna by the author, and as we mentioned previously, that this book At-Timithi by Ibn Malakin, that it is a summary of another book of his, which is called Al-Muqna, which is also a summary of another book, which is the book of Muqaddimah Ibn Salah. So in the book of Ibn Malakin, he mentioned concerning this particular Al-Musnad, when he discussed concerning Musnad as one of those anwa of hadith, and he mentioned of the fourth and now al-rabi'. So he mentioned in his book Al-Muqna that this category or this discussion that is placed in a now al-rabi', and he discussed concerning al-Musnad. So he mentioned as for Musnad wama itasal, so what have been transmitted upon the Prophet alayhi salam with a chain, what has been transmitted upon a Prophet Islam with a complete chain. That's what he defined as Musnad. So as for this discussion, we'll mention concerning that as for Al-Musnad, the discussion relating to Al-Musnad, that it goes back to that you have a discussion between the ulama of hadith regarding defining Al-Musnad, but the one that is mentioned here is said to be the more correct definition of as Musnad. So Musnad is those hadith, as mentioned here, that it have an ittisal, that it have a complete chain going back, ending with the Prophet ﷺ. So that is referred to as Musnad, which sometimes referred to as Marfu'. So and that's the definition given by Al-Hakim An-Nisa'i. That's a definition given by Hakim An-Nisa'i regarding concerning Musnad. And that's the one that is used, and also that's the definition that you find the likes of Ibn Hajar, that they agree with this definition of Al-Musnad. So Musnad in general are those narrations that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, those narration that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, but with the condition of having a complete isnad, with a chain that is complete or unbroken. So from this, that they exclude that those isnad that may be broken, so that would dismiss regarding al-Musnad those hadiths that the chain is broken, such as al-Munqata', Mu'dal, and the likes. So that's concerning that matter regarding al-Musnad. Also another matter concerning, and also to show this fact regarding some of the ulama, that they are attentive regarding this Musnad, that you'll find that they intend by this that the chain should be complete, unbroken, going back to the Prophet of Islam, that you find the likes of, for example, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah in his As-Sahih, as we mentioned, that if you were to look and examine the name of this book, Sahih Bukhari, you'll notice also that he mentioned this. So the book, according to of the name that it is mentioned, which is the book of Imam Bukhari, that it is called Al-Jami' Al-Musnad Al-Sahih Al-Muqtasar min Umur Rasul alayhi salam wa Sunanihi wa Ayyami. So that's the name that is given to Sahih Bukhari. So that's the name that all mentioned that is given to the book, that it is Al-Jami'. Now, that is a very comprehensive book that includes certain different topics that are covered in that. So the word Al-Jami' used by the ulama, it indicates that there are certain topics that is covered within this book. Things relating to al-i'tiqad, belief, things related to ahkam, al-ibadat, things related to mu'amalat is also covered. Also things regarding raqa'iq, things that relates to fadahil, al-anbiya, was sahaba. So these are different topics that will be found in the books of Musnad. So it's a comprehensive things relating to tafsir. So all of these subjects or topics are covered within the books that are referred to as Musnad. So it covers a wide spectrum of different topics. So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah book is said to be of those Musnad, of those Jami'. So he referred to his book as Al-Jami' Al-Musnad Al-Sahih Al-Muqtasar. So from the name we gather certain understanding. The book is Al-Jami'. Second, it is a Musnad, and it carries the meaning of Musnad within the mustalahat, or within the terminology that we are using here, which is that the Isnad can be traced back to the Prophet of Islam with a complete chain. So it ends with the Prophet. So Musnad are those hadith that ends one, the condition of Musnad, one, that the Isnad, it ends with the Prophet of Islam. It goes back to the Prophet of Islam. It does not go back. It doesn't end with the Sahaba or the Tabi'een, but Musnad, it ends with the Prophet of Islam. And second condition of Musnad, that it have a muttasil. The chain is muttasil from what is apparent. So the chain is muttasil in the sense of all the narrators that they heard from the person before them or from their sheikh to the end of the hadith. So this is Al-Musnad. So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, his book is said to be Musnad, or those hadith that are said to be his book is of those Musnad, because all the hadith, it ends with the Prophet of Islam with a complete chain, and that's the condition of his book. So that's concerning that matter. As we mentioned, that there's other ulama who have given other definition, because this book is a mukhtasar, that we won't go into all the different definitions that I mentioned. That will be discussed in the at some other time when we discuss this matter to a more advanced level. So regarding concerning the meaning of Musnad, that as mentioned by the author rahimullah, وَمَا إِتَّصَلَ سَنَدُهُ is what has a complete chain that that ends with the Prophet Islam, and that is Al-Musnad. As for sources of Musnad, hadith that was said no, so sources that one can find hadith that are Musnad, that ends with the Prophet Islam, those books will be most of the books of hadith. So most of the books of hadith that we have, Al-Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abi Dawud, Al-Jami' At-Timithi, Ibn Majah, An-Nisa'i, the books concerning and other books. Most of those books that you'll find, that most of the hadiths that are mentioned in those books, that they are Musnad, that they go back to the Prophet of Islam with some form of a chain which is complete. So that's concerning the source that we can find Musnad. As for the hukum, the third matter is regarding the hukum relating to hadith that are said to be Musnad. Are these hadith sahih? Or does it carry the meaning of the hadith being daif? What hukum does it carry? As for the term Musnad, then it does not carry a hukum. So hadith Musnad is a description of where the hadith comes to an end, of the sanad and matan. So Musnad is given a description of the hadith by way of the sanad and matan. By way of the hadith, it ends with the Prophet Islam. And also, second, that a hadith, that it has a complete chain the chain is unbroken, ending with the Prophet Islam. So that's concerning a description of the Isnad. So that's a description of the Isnad, not per se hukum on the hadith as being authentic or not. So that's concerned that matter. So hadith al-Musnad, at times the hadith that goes back to the Prophet Islam with a complete chain, at times the hadith may be Musnad, but those hadith could fall under the three categories of hadith. At times could be Sahih, the hadith could be Musnad, at times it could be hadith which is Hasan, and also the hadith could be said to be Musnad, and also the hadith is Da'if. So it's not the hukum on the hadith, it's more just a description of the Isnad. As to where the hadith, it comes to an end, and also the Isnad, it has a complete change. That's concerned the matter regarding hadith al-Musnad. So it's not a hukum on the hadith, but rather it's a description of the sanad. So hadith al-Musnad, it gives an indication that this hadith, that it ends with the Prophet Islam. So that's concerned that matter. At times it could be authentic, and at times those hadith are Musnad are said to be da'if. So that's concerning discussion in brief, or that now of hadith al-Musnad. Then author rahimahullah, he mentioned the next, which would be in this book would be number 4, as he mentioned, Sahih 1, Hasan 2, Da'if 3, and we just mentioned al-Musnad, which is the 4th. As for the 5th category that he mentions here, or the 5th type of hadith that he mentioned here, Muttasil, hadith al-Muttasil. So this is one of the description of hadith that are one of the terminology used by the ulama of hadith, hadith al-Muttasil. So he mentioned that what is this? He described by who was huwa ma ittasal isnaduhu marfu'an kana aw mawqufan wa yusamma mawsulan aydan. So the author rahimahullah, Ibn Mulakin rahimahullah, he described or explained what is said to be muttasil by stating huwa ma ittasal isnaduhu. So meaning concerned that no, that hadith, it has a complete chain, marfu'an can, that may end at times end with the Prophet Islam, or mawqufan, it end mawquf, I mean it ends with a sahabi, wa yusamma mawsulan aydan, and also it is referred to, as mawsulan. So this is the next no' of the different types of hadith that the author rahimahullah choose to clarify. So as for further clarification by way of us, then we mentioned that this particular no' al-ittisal or mu'tasil, that it is mentioned in the book of Muqna by the author, the original book of the author, as no al-khamis. So in his other book, this is a summary of that other book, the original, that this particular hadith, he places that in here as the 5th, and also in the other book of Muqna also is the 5th type of hadith that is discussed. And the general meaning he gives here, the general meaning he mentions there. As for those things that are mentioned in hadith al-muttasil, that as the author rahimahullah he mentions here at the end, that also at times it is referred to as mawsul. So the word muttasil and the word mawsul, that they are give the same meaning. That the word that they are used, so those are words that are used meaning the same thing. So at times one may use the word muttasil, and at times one may use the word mawsul. So as for the general discussion, other matters that relates, as he mentioned, so with muttasil, that is a description of the sanad. Muttasil is a description again of the sanad concerning where this hadith ends, with whom the hadith ends. Not concerned that the hadith have a chain which is muttasil, it has a complete chain. So the description of the sanad by way of the sanad is muttasil, where all the narrators are present. So this is not, so that's how the word muttasil also, it could end with a hadith going back to the Prophet alayhi salam, to the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and at times muttasil also could end mawqufan, meaning it ends with a sahabi. So muttasil at times may be marfu', and as I mentioned marfu', that it means that this hadith, it ends with the Prophet alayhi salam, and mawquf, it ends with a sahabi. And muttasil is just one of the criteria or condition for hadith to be authentic. So it's one of those concepts, one of the criteria that must be in place. But it is not, but by saying mu'tasil or mawsul, it does not give the meaning or to be understood that the hadith is authentic. So at times, as we mentioned that in the description of the way, we're concerning the sanad of stating the hadith of a complete, that hadith, it has a complete isnad to where it ends, but also it doesn't mean the hadith is authentic. So at times mawsul could be sahih, at times mawsul could be ruled to be hasan, and at times it could be ruled to be daif, depending on the other condition of hadith, being fully in place. So the hadith of all the condition of sahih, it will be graded sahih accordingly. So muttasil is of those terms that are used to indicate that the hadith have a complete chain from going to the person who narrates it. So that's concerning that matter. As for concerning that, another term that is used is and also mawsul. Also we have makhtur that will be discussed, but this is concerning this particular matter. An example that they give concerning hadith, which is mu'tasil marfu'. So an example by way of an isnad, like Imam Malik rahimahullah in his book Al-Muwatta called An Malik, An Ibn Shihab, An Salim Ibn Abdullah, An Abihi, who is Abdullah, and Rasulullah. So that's concerning a muttasil, a chain which is muttasil, as all the narrators present, and also it is marfu, where it ends with the Prophet. So Imam Malik rahimahullah mentioned An Ibn Shihab, so Malik and Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, and Salim ibn Abdullah, and Abihi, who is Abdullah ibn Umar, and Rasulullah. So that's a complete chain, al-hadith, or example. As for a muttasil, example of muttasil, mawquf, we have Malik, and Nafi', and Ibn Umar. And Nafi', or Malik, and Nafi', and Ibn Umar. And in mention something regarding, so that chain is mu'tasil, but ends with Ibn Umar. So the statement of would be something that goes back to Ibn Umar regarding his statement or his action or the likes. So those are example regarding matters relating to hadith al-muttasil. I will mention the books of hadith regarding al-muttasil al-marfu'. Also you find this in many books of hadith. Of that example, we have a full chain and it ends with a Prophet ﷺ that we refer to. That mu'tasil marfu' would be also similar to what we just said at Musnad. It would be similar as saying Musnad. So sometimes some refer to the word as so Musnad and marfu' carry very similar meaning. Also regarding mu'tasil, mawquf would be concerning books regarding that. They try to more mention and collect narrations going back to the Sahaba. So you have certain books that kind of somewhat, that such as the book of Musannif Ibn Abi Shayba, and also Musannif Ibn Abdul Razak, that they mention many narration going back to the Sahaba, and with a complete chain. So those are books that we may find examples of those. So that's concerning that matter relating to hadith that we mentioned marfu'. So concerning that which is muttasil, and also sometimes referred to as mawsul. The next discussion, so that's concerning that discussion in brief. And as the next matter, as the author rahimahullah, he mentioned that the next category of hadith or type of hadith he mentioned, marfu'. One marfu' huwa ما أضيف إلى النبي عليه السلام خاصة متصلا كان أو غيره. So that's concerning what the author rahimahullah he mentioned regarding the next category of hadith or the next type of hadith. So he mentioned the next type of hadith, which is al-marfu'. So the next type is al-marfu'. What is meant by marfu'? According to the author he mentioned هو ما أضيف إلى النبي عليه السلام خاصة. What goes back to the Prophet, to the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, mu'tasilan can, whether with a complete chain or ghayru, or other than this. So from this, that's the definition of concerning al-marfu' regarding. So marfu' of hadith, and the author rahimullah, when he discussed concerning this category of marfu' in his book, as we mentioned before, in the book of al-Muqni, his original book, that he mentioned this as Naw' sadis. So he's still in the same sequence as his original book, where he mentioned in his original book al-Muqni, he mentioned al-marfu' as the sixth, and also here he mentioned as the sixth. Naw' sadis. You have also some other ulama who have some other definition of concerning what is marfu', that the likes of Khatib al-Baghdadi, that stipulate that narration must be narrated through a sahabi upon the Prophet of Islam for it to be said to be marfu'. So you have that discussion regarding, a little discussion between the ulama, but what is mentioned here regarding concerning al-marfu' ma'udif Nabi al-Islam. So what have been mentioned here regarding what is marfu' is what is the general meaning of what is used by the ulama of regarding mutaakhir, regarding what is al-marfu'. So marfu', as he mentioned marfu', that he mentioned ma'udifa. So other definitions that are given by the ulama that are maybe more, we mentioned another more precise definition. So the author rahimullah, he mentioned marfu' huwa ma'udifa ila Nabi al-Islam khasa mu'tasilan kana aw ghayra. So that's concerning the definition given by the author, that which is narrated upon the Prophet of Islam specifically, whether by a chain which is complete or incomplete. Other definitions that are given by the ulama in trying to be more precise, and we mention because it's more precise and more clearer in its definition, they mention that marfu' in defining the marfu' hadith al-marfu', they gave that marfu' one, it fall into two categories. Marfu' hadith al-marfu' fall into two categories, and both those two categories have a little difference in their definition. So the first definition that is given, which is the first type of hadith al-marfu', that referred to as marfu' as-sarih. Hadith al-marfu' sarih. Those hadith that goes back, trace back to the Prophet of Islam clearly, directly. So they mentioned that what is out, and it is defined as ma udifa sarahatan or sarihan. So ma udifa sarihan ila Nabi al-Islam min qawlihi aw fi'lihi aw taqriri aw sifati. So they mentioned concerning marfu' as-sarih, marfu' which is direct. They mentioned ma udifa sarihan, what is narrated upon the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly from his statements, his actions, the things he approved of, and fourth, sifatu, and also his description. So this is what they refer to as marfu' sarih. This is marfu' and direct. So it goes back to those things that have been transmitted upon the Prophet of Islam, of his statements, his actions, the things he approved of, takriri, or min takriri, or the thing that he approved of that were done by others, the Sahaba, and fourth, sifati. And the fourth being is description. So these are what they refer to as marfu' as-sarih. And that's where these things are marfu' as-sarih, in the sense of that these narrations directly goes back to the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these ones are direct in relation with him alayhi salam. The second type of marfu', hadith al-marfu', they mention marfu' hukman. Marfu' hukman. So the second type of hadith is marfu' hukman. So marfu', meaning that it goes back to the Prophet of Islam. Hukman in the sense of it's indirect. So by way of it's indirect. So they refer to it as hukman. Meaning they define it as huwa, that is defined as huwa ma lam yusarrih, those that which have not been clearly directed, referred back to him alayhi salam. So that which is not directly referred back to him alayhi salam. ولكن, to the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ولكن, but دلت القراهن على أنه من قوله. But there's other sources, that indicates that it goes back to him. So there's other factors that indicates that it goes back to the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though it is not direct, but rather indirect. So that is marfu' hukman, meaning that you have those narrations that based upon factors, it is directed back to the Prophet of Islam, even though it is not from him directly. So those would be cases where you find that, for example, those cases of marfu hukman, a sahabi, one of sahaba, stating or saying something, but they didn't directly refer it back to the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it is understood that what they're saying came from him, even though they didn't refer it back to him alayhi salam. And that will be cases where a sahabi, one of the companions, speak of a matter or discuss a matter that they say la majali ijtihad, is not something that goes back to ijtihad, it's not something they can speak of offers their own opinion, such as matters relating to things regarding things of the future. La majalu rahi, things that relates to matter that is of the future, regarding matters relating qiyamah, matters relating to ashratu sa. These are not for them to speak from themselves. So it is understood or taken that if they were to speak of these things, did not direct it directly back to the Prophet of Islam, then it is understood that they got it from him in some way or another, because it's not a matter that is open for ijtihad. So that's concerning those matters. So that's referred to as we mentioned, marfu' hukmin. And the first category is much more direct and straightforward, marfu' sariyah, where that matter directly goes back to the Prophet of Islam by way of his speech, his actions, the things he approved of, and also his description. Then the second goes into more of a discussion where regarding marfu' hukman, where we mentioned that it's from a companions who's narrating something about the Prophet of Islam that is not that one would not expect them to speak from themselves about this matter out of ijtihad. As we mentioned, that you might find that's not matter concerning that's no akhbar regarding that if one was to do a particular action, you get certain reward. Or we mentioned things that a person speak about, things of ghaib, things of the unseen, that requires some insight by way of al-wahi. And also some of the ulama, they add regarding hadith al-marfu', that it is said to be marfu', that one marfu' hukman is something spoken by the sahaba that relates to either matter that relates to thawab, a specific thawab that a person receives for doing something, or a specific iqab, punishment for the person falling into an act of sin, an act, or they speak of things of ghaib, things of the unseen that relate to concerning Yawm al-Qiyamah, or speak about things regarding ashratu sa, signs of the hours. So these things Sahaba would not speak from his own self on those matters. So the ulama take those matters, if they speak about these topics, then they take it of it is marfu' hukman. It is given the ruling of being something that goes back to the Prophet of Islam, even though it is not direct. And that's from the husnul dhan with the Sahaba. And also the mentions, and the ulama add a condition that Sahaba is not known to take from Bani Israel, Or a Sahaba is not known to take things from people of the book. He's not known for this. So regarding concerns to the next discussion, after clarifying that hadith marfu' is of two types, sariyah wa hukman, then also we discuss the next matter to be discussed. Then we discuss concern that one is more clear than the other. As for hadith al-marfu', we said again marfu' is a description of where the hadith, whom the hadith ends with. Marfu' is just given an indication of whom the hadith ends with. And that concerning marfu' means the hadith, it ends with the Prophet ﷺ. So the word marfu' it means that whatever the narration is, that it ends with the Prophet ﷺ, and not a Sahabi, nor a Tabi'in. So that's kind of somewhat, it gives us an idea concerning that this hadith marfu', it ends with the Prophet ﷺ and no one else. So it's more a description of where the hadith, whom the hadith ends with. Also from this, from marfu', it doesn't per se give us a clear hukum regarding something being authentic or not. So it does. So at times it may fall into again that sahih because it fulfills all the condition and it ends with the Prophet Islam. So it is greater sahih because it complies with all the condition, or it could be hasan because it complies with those the condition, or marfu' could be also da'if because it forfeit the condition of acceptability or qabul. So, for example, that you find some companions, Anas bin Malik anhu, he mentioned regarding the Prophet in the hadith in the Bukhari, that he mentioned regarding the Prophet Islam, where he states, كان النبي الإسلام أحسن الناس خلقا. That Anas described the Prophet Islam as being a person who's of the best of conduct, and that's a form of marfu' sariyah. That's marfu' sariyah, where he's describing the Prophet Islam regarding his conduct. So you find hadith of those types that and those hadith that there are many. You find concerning hadith being marfu', that you find hadith that in the books of hadith that there are most of the book concerning hadith books, that hadith book is mainly to gather matters related to the Prophet Islam. So you find this is consistent in the books of hadith regarding hadith being marfu'. Hadith, what they discuss next. Then you have some other, so we'll end with that, even concerning hadith, we'll end with that matter, as you have some other, we'll go into the next matter, which is al-mawquf. So mawquf, have a little more discussion regarding mawquf, a little more discussion. So inshallah ta'ala, for this lesson, we'll end there regarding what we mentioned today regarding hadith, al-Musnad. Second, in today's lesson, we'll cover concerning hadith, muttasil or mawsul, and third, hadith al-marfu'. So it's got to have an understanding as to these terminologies, what they are, how they are used and understood amongst the ulama of hadith, and how we should understand them in proper light. So all of those description of musnad, muttasil, and marfu', as we mentioned, that it is not an hukum, a final hukum on an hadith. It's not a final hukum upon a hadith, indicating whether the hadith is authentic or not. So that inshallah ta'ala we'll stop for today. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهادي إلى سبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.